April 15, 1859. Mississippi River bend near Vicksburg. The River Patrol's report lists the discovery of footprints leading into the water. No return tracks were found on either bank. The handwriting changes mid-sentence. The ink stops on the word miss. The remaining half page is blank except for the date and the initials JH written faintly in the lower margin. No explanation follows, only the sound of the paper tearing at its edge, as if the rest of the account was removed deliberately. A separate logbook from the same week notes a missing woman from a plantation several miles south. Her name is not recorded. The overseer's report reads, "Took 2 others. Believed headed north by water. There is no warrant for pursuit. No note of recovery. Only the words presumed drowned appear at the bottom of the entry. The handwriting of the clerk who wrote it appears different from the hand that filled the rest of the page. The line underneath is left empty as though waiting for confirmation that never came." A damaged ledger from a trading post downstream lists 3 items paid in silver, 1 small skiff lamp oil, coarse bread. The entry stops mid-sentence. The merchant's signature trails into a smear cut short as if interrupted. The next page is missing, torn away cleanly along the binding. The single surviving sheet carries a faint scent of smoke that has never faded even after more than a century in storage. In 1860, a census agent adds a side note beside the household count. Unaccounted persons, female, approximately 30 may have crossed near the bluff. The handwriting slants sharply downward, thin and hurried. The ink fades to gray in the lower margin. No second notation appears. The field for remarks remains blank. No one followed up. The page bears a round watermark shaped like a drop spreading outward, half circular as if pressed by wet fingers. 80 years later, in 1937, a WPA field worker collecting oral histories in the same parish records an old man's testimony. He speaks slowly, describing a woman who carried the river in her voice. He claims she led people across when the water was low and the patrols were asleep. He says she never called out, only whispered the names of those she guided. When asked her name, he pauses before answering. The river took it. The recording ends with the sound of crickets and the creak of the worker's chair. Another interview taken a month later repeats the same story almost word for word. The teller is different, the phrasing identical. In this version, the woman is both guide and spirit. Some call her the mother of the crossing, others the one who waited. In every retelling, the pattern holds. She leads them through, and when they reach the opposite bank, she is gone. The silence that follows is treated as proof that she stayed behind. Among the WPA archives, one field note bears a faint pencil circle around the line. They saw her lantern drift downstream. The collector underlined the word lantern twice. No annotation follows. The page is unsigned, the handwriting precise but weak, suggesting exhaustion. The tape label attached to the note reads only Field 7C. The next recording in the sequence begins abruptly with a new location, as if a reel had been lost. A surviving letter from that same collector to his supervisor mentions a flood destroying part of his notes. He writes, 2 books gone, tape damaged, but I remember the voice clearly, though the name was never said. The correspondence stops there. His later reports never mention the woman again. No record indicates whether he returned to the site. His employment with the WPA ended that year. The Mississippi Historical Survey inventory, compiled decades later, lists an entry titled Unknown Female Narrative Fragment Incomplete. The category reads Escape, Folklore, 1850s. Condition poor. Source unidentified. Access restricted pending restoration. The description closes with one line related to river crossings. Possibly mythic. It has not been amended since. In the same region, a church hymn recorded in 1938 carries a refrain that translates to "The water remembers." No author is given. The melody resembles the cadence of riverwork songs from the 1850s. It is still sung at certain gatherings in Warren County. The first wax cylinder record of the song bears a handwritten note. Unknown woman, strong voice, night chorus, Mississippi Bend. Scholars have argued whether it is coincidence or continuation. No photograph exists. Only a rough pencil sketch printed in a pamphlet decades after shows a woman standing knee-deep in water holding a line of reeds. Her face is unfinished. The eyes are blank. The caption beneath reads, Leader of the Crossing, circa 1859. The artist is unnamed. The paper has yellowed unevenly, and the imprint of another drawing is faintly visible on the reverse, suggesting reuse of discarded material. All remaining materials fit today inside a single gray folder. Brittle pages, smoke odor, 2 transcription slips, and an envelope marked "Do Not Copy." The handwriting on the label is fading into the fibers. The story, however, persists across counties and generations, carried in fragments, whispers, and hymns. The pattern repeats, unchanged footprints entering the water, none returning. Each retelling ends the same way, without proof, without closure. The modern catalog classifies the folder as unverified narrative probable composite. Funding for verification ended before the handwriting analysis could begin. A curator's marginal note adds subject matter emotionally sensitive. The handwriting of that note is dated 1979. Since then, the folder has remained unopened in the archives of Jackson. Today, the riverbank where the first prints were discovered lies 30 yards downstream of its 19th century position. Flooding erases and redraws the land each season. No markers indicate the spot. Only the slow change in the current suggests where the sand once held human weight. Locals say the water there runs colder than anywhere else on that bend. Fishermen avoid it after dusk. This is all that remains: a fragment of ink, a missing reel, a rumor repeated for generations. No confirmation, no photograph, only the endurance of an unfinished sentence. Every surviving version begins with the same words: "She led the river." None record how it ended. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're listening from and the moment you paused. What did you feel in that silence? The earliest mention of the case appears in a bound volume labeled Vicksburg County Ledger 1859-1862, preserved in the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. The entry occupies half a page under unverified incidents, written in dark brown ink that has faded unevenly across the paper. The handwriting is attributed to Deputy Clerk Jonathan H. Rowe, who maintained local patrol reports during that period. His initials, J.H., match the mark found on the water-damaged patrol record. The ledger was transferred to Jackson in 1911 when the county courthouse was rebuilt after fire damage. A separate page in the same volume contains a marginal annotation dated 2 months later. Case unresolved, no identification. The tone of the note is procedural, the kind used for minor thefts or livestock losses. Yet the presence of human remains or missing persons typically required a coroner's statement. None exists. The clerk's successors continued the numbering sequence without skipping the page, implying the case was filed but never closed. The ledger was rediscovered in 1933 by a state archivist, Margaret Lynn Folsom, while cataloging damaged county records for WPA preservation. Her summary sheet stored alongside the ledger reads, "Entry references unnamed female presumed drowned. Possible correlation with oral testimonies from Warren Parish collected 1937. Folsom's remark is one of the first to connect the 1859 report with the WPA field interviews nearly 80 years later. Margaret Folsom's correspondence with the WPA Folklore Division in Washington indicates that she forwarded a typed transcript of the ledger page to a field coordinator named James R. Culver. Culver's response, dated January 12, 1934, confirms receipt and notes his intention to seek surviving local narratives corresponding to the incident. 2 years later, in 1936, Culver's name appears again in WPA payroll lists for the Mississippi Oral History Project. The microfilm copy of Culver's collected notes survives in Box 47 of the Folklore Division files labeled Mississippi River Oral Accounts, Warren and Claiborne. The first reel includes a typed summary of 4 interviews, 2 of which contain direct mention of the woman who crossed the river. A faint pencil line under the title reads, "Possibly linked to 1859 Vicksburg Ledger Fragment, MDAH, Referent Code 1214B. The notation is unsigned, but the handwriting resembles that of Culver. Culver's field diary, preserved only in fragments, provides additional background. In an entry dated June 8, 1937, he describes traveling from Vicksburg to Bovina by wagon carrying 2 Edison field recorders and a supply of blank discs. He records ambient conditions: heat, insects, water level, local informants, but never specifies exact coordinates. In the margin, beside a line referencing the River Woman tale, he writes simply, "Voice genuine, can't tell if she believes." The diary continues for several pages, describing other folklore collections in neighboring counties. His final entry, dated August 21, 1937, ends with the line, "Road flooded will return after rains." There is no subsequent volume. Correspondence between WPA staff later notes that Culver ceased communication after late 1938. The last official record of his employment is a payroll sheet marked absent. No resignation or termination letter is filed. 2 years later, a memorandum from Supervisor Folsom to Washington mentions that field worker Culver has not been located for follow-up submission. She adds that his assigned area was Warren County, near the same road leading to the 1859 crossing site. The coincidence is noted, but not investigated. The line following her remark is typed in parentheses. Unconfirmed report local authorities found his abandoned wagon near the riverbank. The surviving materials from Culver's project include only partial transcripts typed on onion skin paper. Each page carries a header with the standard WPA format, county informant name often replaced by date and location. The first of these reads, Informant Male Approx. 70s Warren Parish. Date May 11, 1937. The testimony opens with, "My granddaddy say she walked in that water with a lamp and the light never went out." The next page is torn at the bottom edge, leaving the last sentence unfinished. Of the 4 interviews on the reel, only 2 are complete enough to cross-reference with the 1859 ledger. Both describe a woman guiding others across the river. One adds that she was known by no name but the one they gave her later. The interviewer's margin note asks possible coded songs suggesting that the story may have been preserved through a spiritual or work chant rather than literal memory. Folsom's follow-up correspondence to the Folklore Division, dated December 1937, summarizes the field collection as one among several river narratives showing remarkable consistency across regions. She highlights the thematic overlap with escape accounts from Adams County, though warns against romantic conflation. Her tone remains cautious, scientific, reflecting WPA guidelines discouraging interpretation beyond transcription. In the archives of Jackson Box 12 of the Mississippi Folklore Project holds the only existing carbon copy of Culver's notes. The pages are fragile, partly translucent, bound with rusted staples. A single annotation in red pencil stands out near the top margin of page 2. Same voice as hymn 7C. Scholars believe this refers to the unidentified recording labeled Field 7C Woman's Voice Unknown, found in the regional audio collection. The implication is that Culver may have interviewed or recorded the same singer mentioned in later catalogs. The recording itself was transferred to magnetic tape in the 1950s, then digitized in 2002. The original wax disc, cracked and incomplete, is stored in climate-controlled vaults under the Mississippi State University Library. The archivist's log notes surface noise and missing content. Only 43 seconds of audio survive a low female voice humming a slow, repetitive phrase resembling the rhythm of oars in water. A research annotation added in 1984 by historian Elaine Thorne draws direct connection between this audio fragment and the 1937 oral accounts. Thorne suggests that the steady pulse of the recording mirrors the cadence of movement, possibly ritual, possibly labor. She stops short of labeling it folklore, categorizing it instead as transmitted memory in musical form. Her analysis appears in Southern Ethnographic Quarterly Volume 12, though she concedes that verification remains impossible given fragmentary evidence. The chain of custody for the physical documents traces through multiple institutions. After Folsom's retirement, portions of her WPA correspondence were boxed and sent to the Federal Writers Project in Washington, then returned to Jackson in 1941. Subsequent reorganizations scattered the material among state archives, university folklore collections, and private holdings. The majority was consolidated again in 1975 under the Mississippi Archival Reclamation Program. Each relocation introduced new catalog numbers, causing partial duplication and confusion. Current archival notation identifies the related artifacts under cross-index code MHSP-RIV1859-JHR. This code links the 1859 ledger entry, the 1937 WPA interviews, and the audio file Field 7C. Metadata confirms that all 3 refer to the same geographical coordinates within a 2-mile radius of the modern Vicksburg levee. The relationship between these records forms the structural foundation for contemporary analysis of the woman who led the river. At least one piece of correspondence suggests that Folsom herself doubted the unity of the account. In a letter dated March 1940, she writes, "We may be dealing with more than one event merged by oral tradition." The repetition of the phrase, "she stayed behind," across counties could indicate a shared narrative motif rather than a singular historical act. The sentence ends with a line break followed by, "Still one wonders if the name in the ledger was erased by intent." No official investigation into the missing pages of the 1859 ledger has been recorded. The county clerk's office in Vicksburg claims the documents were already incomplete when transferred to the state archive. Microfilm reproductions confirm irregular pagination between entries 118 and 119 corresponding to April 1859. The break leaves precisely the section where the woman's identification might have appeared. Scholars reviewing the material through the 1980s and 1990s continued to debate its classification. Some categorized the story under mythic reinterpretation of escape routes. Others, like folklorist Henry McGowan, insisted that such narratives often originated from a single verifiable occurrence. McGowan cites topographical surveys showing a sandbar crossing active during the 1850s, aligning with descriptions in the oral accounts. Recent digitization of the WPA field recordings in 2008 revealed another fragment connected to Culver's work. A mislabeled acetate disc titled Warren 1937 Test Number 4 contains 8 seconds of a male voice saying, "She sang before they walked." The voice resembles that of informant D. Carter from another Mississippi interview. The timing matches the same collection window as Culver's missing reel. This connection, though circumstantial, reinforces the continuity between testimony and event. The broader research community remains divided over whether the convergence of sources indicates authentic historical memory or the cumulative echo of folklore. The absence of a verifiable name photograph or burial record makes empirical proof unattainable. Yet the consistency of detail, year, location, river crossing, woman as guide, exceeds the usual variability of oral retellings. This statistical anomaly continues to draw attention from ethnographers and archivists. One final observation appears handwritten at the bottom of Culver's surviving diary page: "Return after rains, check lantern mark." Scholars have speculated that lantern mark refers to a physical site or carved symbol along the riverbank. Subsequent surveys found nothing definitive, only patterns of erosion consistent with annual flooding. The note remains the last written trace of James R. Culver. No document describes his disappearance in official terms, no obituary, no employment record beyond 1938. Only Margaret Folsom's annotation endures. The field worker who recorded this testimony vanished 2 years later on the same road. Whether the story of the woman who led the river ended with her or began again through him, the archives offer no answer. The documents end precisely where certainty should begin, in silence, in missing pages, in the faint impression of handwriting pressed too hard against fading paper. In the archives of Natchez, a half-torn page from the Southern Register dated April 28, 1859, carries a short advertisement: "Runaway, one female, aged near 30, light brown complexion, medium height. Last seen near the Vicksburg crossing, believed accompanied by 2 others. Reward for confirmation." The ad is unsigned. The printing ink has bled into the page, suggesting it was run on a cheap press. In the column beside it, an unrelated notice advertises lamp oil. Local oral accounts describe a woman who carried a lamp walking by the river at night. They say she never spoke louder than the wind through cane grass. In one version, her light could be seen from the opposite bank but never reached it. Another says the lamp floated away when she disappeared. Children were told to stay inside on nights when the river glowed faintly. "That's when she's walking again," they said, counting names that didn't cross. The Freedmen's Bureau Field Report, District 4, Mississippi, 1867, compiled 8 years later, references residual cases of unrecorded disappearance prior to emancipation. Among them is a notation: "Unverified rumor of female guide assisting escapees across the Yazoo tributary," likely apocryphal. The report's author, Lieutenant A.B. Caldwell, includes no supporting evidence. His tone is administrative final. Yet in the margin, another hand has penciled "Witness accounts persist." A WPA field worker named Reverend D. Carter recorded one of those witness accounts from an elderly woman in Warren County, 1937. She recalled her grandmother's words: "They crossed when the sky was black, when dogs wouldn't bark. She was the one carried the song. Asked what song, she answered, 'The river's song. The one you can't sing twice.'" Her voice trembled when describing how the sound came from under the water. The transcript ends with the note informant cried, refused to continue. Court archives from Vicksburg's pre-war docket include a petition, Caldwell v. Owens, 1860, involving a disputed property claim over missing servants presumed escaped. Among the evidence, an affidavit by one Horace Owens mentions a colored woman seen near the ferry at night waving a lantern and calling for silence. The court dismissed the statement as nonsensical. The clerk's annotation beside it reads simply "folklore influence." Folklore indeed persisted. In a 1903 sermon transcribed by Missionary Archives in Claiborne Parish, the preacher references the woman by the water as a symbol of deliverance. He tells the congregation, "She led the way when the world was blind." Parishioners respond with the chant, "She stayed, she stayed." The repetition is rhythmic, ritualistic, echoing the structure of early spirituals. No one knows when the words entered local worship. Military correspondence dated June 1859, preserved in the National Archives, includes a letter from Captain J. M. Dobson to a superior officer. Received reports of missing property and fugitives traveling via river route near Bovina. No arrests made. Locals claim to hear signal drums at night, though no encampments reported. The report is dry, technical, stripped of sentiment. In folklore, those drums become heartbeat and warning the sound before the water moves. Another advertisement from the Vicksburg Gazette, May 1859, repeats the earlier description with one change: female runaway, possibly with child. No follow-up issue confirms her capture. The same paper's June edition features a notice of river flooding that destroyed several plantations near the lower banks. Local oral tradition connects the two, claiming the flood was her doing the river rose to cover their tracks. A song fragment preserved in a 1921 hymnal reads, "She called the water, and it came." A surviving letter from a Union soldier stationed in Mississippi dated August 1863 recounts a story told by local freedpeople. They say there was a woman before the war who could make the water part for those who walked behind her. They say she never reached the other side. They say the river took her. The soldier adds strange tale, but they speak it like truth. His letter was published posthumously in the Atlantic Register 1872. Freedmen's Bureau testimony from 1866 recorded in Jackson includes the case of an elderly man named Eli Price. When asked about early escape attempts, he mentioned the crossing woman who led people north. His words, "She never run, she float. The water walk with her." The interviewer marks this as folkloric. Price insists, "No, sir, my mama saw her lamp." The transcript's next line reads, "Interview suspended due to agitation." In 1881, the Southern Folklore Almanac printed a brief column titled "The River Lady of Vicksburg." It combined superstition and history, describing a female apparition who appears near the bluffs before storms. The entry cites oral sources among freed communities. The tone is dismissive, bordering on ridicule. Yet the same issue prints an unrelated historical note about 3 unnamed women missing from plantation records in 1859. The juxtaposition goes unacknowledged. By 1930, folklorist Irene McNally compiled Songs of the Delta, an anthology of oral spirituals. Track 12, titled "The Crossing," bears lyrics too faint to transcribe completely. "Light low, water slow, walk till we don't know." McNally's annotation calls it derivative of older escape songs, perhaps tied to local legend of a woman guide. When played at half speed, the recording reveals a faint second voice beneath the main singer, humming the same line a beat behind. In 1942, anthropologist Arthur Franks recorded a dream testimony from a former river worker in Louisiana. The man claimed that during a fever he saw her walking on the bank, not young, not old, holding a broken lamp. He said she spoke only once, "You ain't cross yet." Franks categorized the account under folk belief visionary episode. The notebook page ends with an underlined dream repeats thrice over 2 nights. Fact and memory diverge yet keep meeting at the same bend. In every document, the pattern recurs: a woman, a lamp, a crossing, a disappearance. Official records strip her name. Folklore restores it only as image. The absence of identification in 1859 becomes the foundation of spiritual identity in later retellings. She shifts from fugitive to saint, from human loss to eternal guide. Both histories insist she existed, though, for opposite reasons. Another entry from the Bureau's 1868 reconciliation files mentions a small gathering of freedwomen along the lower river singing unrecorded hymns of deliverance. The supervising agent calls the songs inappropriate for labor hours. His report concludes possible connection to older superstition of water-walking woman. He does not elaborate further. That remark, buried in bureaucracy, becomes the only official acknowledgement of a legend already half a century old. An unsigned note found in the margin of a WPA transcription from 1937 reads, "Informant's eyes unfocused when recalling light over river." Possible trance state. The typist underlined possible twice. Another line adds, "Smell of oil" when playback reviewed. The smell of oil, whether from the recorder, the reel, or imagination, aligns with the oldest motif of all the lamp that never went out. A hymnal recovered from a destroyed church near Bovina, estimated circa 1870, contains a single handwritten line between verses, "She stayed so we could go." The handwriting appears to be that of a woman, the ink nearly vanished. The book was later sold as scrap paper salvaged during restoration and filed in the wrong drawer for decades. When rediscovered, the page was already torn through the sentence. The archivist glued it carefully and marked partial inscription, "Unknown author." The dual record, administrative and spiritual, continues to pulse through every surviving document. Fact insists she vanished, case unresolved, name erased. Folklore insists she remained walking each generation's memory like a shoreline that refuses to settle. Between both layers lies the unprovable aconvergence, where evidence ends and belief begins. The historians call it coincidence, the elders call it proof. Report April 22, 1859. Search concluded at dawn. No survivors were found. River depth measured at 14 feet. No trace of the missing skiff. Oral record remembered 80 years later. But the drums still answered that night. The official note ends with coordinates and the name of the officer in charge. The oral story names no officer, no time. Only that the sound of a drum moved upriver and faded into rain. Ledger entry, May 1859. Recovered items. Rope wooden pole fragment of lantern frame. Interview fragment 1937. She tied a rope so no one would drift away. The light stayed above the water even when her hands were gone. The two lines meet like reflections, each denying the other. The rope as evidence of accident. The rope as symbol of care. Both exist in the same river, one written, one sung. Freedmen's Bureau Supplement Report, 1867. Locals maintain false tradition of woman leading escapes. No corroboration. Song collected Warren County, 1935. Follow her feet, follow her flame. The Bureau report dismisses it as superstition. The song gives directions. Neither acknowledges the other's existence, yet both survive in parallel, one stamped with official ink, the other pressed into melody. Census annotation, 1860. Unaccounted female servant, possibly deceased. Oral note, 1937. She was not dead, she was changed. The written line speaks in closure, the spoken one in continuation. Between them lies the silence of missing witnesses. No ledger lists the moment where one becomes the other. A damaged court document, Caldwell v. Owens, 1860, breaks off mid-page. The final visible words read, "If she returned," followed by torn paper. A WPA field worker later adds, "The next line is missing. Only one word remains, returned." No record clarifies what returned the woman, the property, or the story. Each version rewrites the same absence differently. Newspaper clipping. The Vicksburg Gazette, June 1859. Bodies recovered following storm. No identification possible. Folklore fragment undated. She walked out after the storm carrying the names of those who drowned. The report freezes loss into statistic. The folklore restores individuality. Each side compensates for what the other deletes. Army Logbook, 1863. Suspected fugitive routes closed along Yazoo tributary. No movement observed. Dream testimony. WPA Archive, 1937. She stood where two rivers met and said no road but water. Official movement ended where the dream began. One marks surveillance, the other revelation. The logbook stops at observation, the dream at understanding. Letter Lieutenant A.B. Caldwell to Headquarters, 1867. Superstitions hinder labor organization. Local chants reference unnamed woman. Recommend suppression. Folk reply undated hymn fragment. They tell us to hush. We hum anyway. The government silenced belief. The field recordings captured the hush itself, a murmur between defiance and memory. Church minutes. Claiborne Parish, 1903. Congregation advised to avoid unsanctioned river rituals. Oral recollection, 1937. We prayed by the water because she once did. Institution and inheritance, both claiming devotion, both drawing their lines around the same invisible figure. The official document prohibits what the oral memory preserves. Letter from Captain Dobson, 1859. Locals claim phantom lights near riverbank. Investigation found none. Testimony from elderly informant WPA, 1937. I saw it once, sir. Not light, but breath glowing over the water. Dobson's skepticism closes the file. The informant's vision opens it again. The glow remains suspended between the two, denied yet recounted, unseen yet enduring. A page from Southern Folklore Almanac, 1881, dismisses the River Lady as Negro superstition. It cites unnamed sources and ends with the line, "No credible witness." In the same collection, a marginal note added decades later reads, "Credible witnesses do not always survive." The handwriting is faint, unsigned, smaller than print. It does not belong to any editor. Microfilm 7C, 1937, audio test tone followed by 43 seconds of humming. The catalog entry lists unknown female voice. Military requisition report, 1859. Recovered one lantern frame. No light contained. The humming rises and falls like the flicker of a flame. The lamp in the report is extinguished. The voice remains. Two artifacts of the same gesture, one recorded by machine, one by memory. Surveyor's Notebook, 1860. Erosion along lower banks consistent with flooding. Discoloration on trees, likely mineral. Folklore account same location. Her hands stained the trees black when she held on too long. Science calls it mineral story, calls it touch. The line between them runs as thin as water on bark. Neither disproves the other. Both describe what remains visible. Rail Company Correspondence, 1879. No human remains found during levee construction. Work continues. Local chant preserved by schoolteacher, 1912. Build your road above her bones. The industrial voice ignores. The inherited one accuses. Each insists on progress, but only one demands remembrance. Archive Log, 1933. Field documents deteriorating due to humidity. Some pages unreadable. Fieldworker Annotation, 1937. Even the pages sound like water when turned. The physical decay mirrors the metaphoric flow, the river's humidity swallowing its own documentation. The archivist's silence becomes part of the narrative's echo. Report from Federal Writers Project, 1938. Oral accounts display identical phrasing indicating contamination. Oral tradition. Response, 1938, same county. We keep the words the same so she won't get lost again. To the researcher, repetition means corruption. To the community, preservation. The repetition becomes defiance accuracy of feeling over fact. Census Ledger, 1860. Property losses unrecovered. Estimated value, $1,200. Later hymn recorded 1937. Worth not in gold, but in breath. Numbers in ink, values in air, both attempt measurement. The record tallies the cost. The song weighs the meaning. Neither converts into the other's language. Military map folded in archive marks the area impassable. The legend identifies terrain features. Swamp sandbar, quick current. A red X fades in the margin. Folklore map drawn by school children in 1940 labels the same bend where she crossed. No coordinates. Only a line of blue crayon and 3 words, don't step twice. The topography of memory resists the geometry of proof. The two maps side by side contradict and complete each other. The final government statement, undated, concludes subject of limited historical importance. The oral archive refuses to end. Each recording begins where the other stopped. Fact leaves no survivors. Folklore leaves no dead. The contradiction sustains itself, a dialogue of erasure, and return two worlds reading from the same river until one forgets the language of the other. In 1868, the Reconstruction Bureau issued its first migration report of freed populations for Mississippi. Within the data columns, 3 unnamed households are marked as origin Warren County, destination unrecorded northward. The handwriting is formal, deliberate. A faint smudge obscures the notation under remarks. When examined under infrared light in 1999, the hidden words appeared faintly crossed by Nightwater High. The report identifies no leader-only movement. The following decade, in 1879, the New Orleans Herald published a short piece about former slaves returning to the South to reclaim lost family members. One correspondent describes a woman of middle years said to know the safe way across the river, remembered only by voice. The tone is anecdotal, but its date coincides with the Bureau's column. Between official migration data and printed rumor lies a perfect symmetry, numbers heading north and a legend returning south. A letter from Sergeant Elias Morton, written in March 1865, recounts guarding the river crossings near Bovina during the last months of the war. He writes, locals say, the water hides more than bodies. A freedman told me his mother crossed once, led by a woman carrying light. He believes she guides others still. The Army kept his correspondence for logistical detail, but the emotional residue lingers. His signature bleeds through the envelope like the water through the soil he describes. A surviving field chart from the Corps of Engineers, 1869, traces new channels after a flood reshaped the Mississippi's western edge. A single pencil mark outside the official border bears the note, Old Crossing Site, local warning, don't disturb. Engineers ignored the superstition, but 2 workmen drowned the following season. The official investigation cites strong undercurrent. Local memory calls it the hand that pulls. Across the river, spiritual songs emerge that seem to echo those lost coordinates. One recovered from the Fisk University Archive, 1872, titled, Walk Slow Through the Water, bears a melody too close to the 1930 WPA recording to be coincidence. The refrain reads, "Don't speak her name, don't wake her hand." The song's function, according to ethnomusicologist Clara Jenkins, was twofold, both warning and homage. It records the place not on map, but in rhythm. Fact and folklore continue to converge in documents written by those who never met. In 1871, a reconstruction agent named John Merritt compiled Testimony of Freed Persons Volume 2. Among 39 statements, one mentions a crossing led by woman in years before freedom came. The informant Mary Lyles adds, "She said the water was a bridge only once." Merritt dismisses the line as poetic expression. A century later, a flood survey identified a temporary sandbar at the same river bend present only one season, a bridge of silt that vanished as suddenly as it appeared. An 1880 map of Warren County, printed by the Mississippi Geological Survey, shows faint dotted trails labeled former ferry sites. One dot, placed slightly off the main channel, bears no name. In the margin, a handwritten note by a later surveyor reads, "Local folklore river shifts to hide a path." The mapmaker's intent was to fix geography. The margin reintroduces myth into the act of measurement. The Jackson Times, October 1895, prints a feature titled "Phantoms of the Old South." Among its sections, a paragraph reads, "Travelers report hearing a woman's hymn across the water on storm nights." The reporter attributes it to wind. The paper folded the following year. Oral accounts, however, begin using the phrase "storm hymn" to describe prayers said for those lost at the crossing. The press dismisses what faith retains. In a church ledger dated 1904 from Mount Zion Parish, a minister's marginalia reads, "Memorial service held for the river woman." No record of her body, yet members insisted on the ceremony. He includes the day's collection total and a note that the hymn sung was old-style unknown author. The entry is sandwiched between ordinary donations and baptisms. Between two sacraments, the unsanctioned one stands out, faith acknowledging absence as form of presence. During the WPA years, researchers found fragments of dream testimony echoing through generations. A field worker named Lila Pritchard interviewed a woman identified only as Aunt Renee who described recurring dreams of a lantern over water. "Sometimes it was her, sometimes me," she said. "If I wake too soon, I smell oil." The transcript notes, "Interview interrupted due to tears." The rational explanation, dream repetition from oral inheritance, cannot erase the sensory precision that accompanies it. In 1938, anthropologist Arthur Franks cross-referenced WPA songs with 19th-century Freedmen's Bureau testimony. His report, Cultural Persistence in River Narratives, concludes that the figure of the unnamed woman represents the collective embodiment of flight. But in his appendix, one line contradicts his thesis. Several informants claim physical familiarity as if the guide was a remembered person, not a symbol. The body of the study seeks myth. The footnote slips toward history. Military records provide one last mirror. A 1910 Army Corps inspection file describes persistent local resistance to dredging operations near historic crossings. The supervising officer reports workers abandoning the site after unexplained sounds resembling singing beneath machinery. He recommends moving operations upriver to avoid interference from community superstition. The entry ends with the notation, "Request approved." The map of the river altered again, not by flood, but by song. From that period forward, folklore begins recording the absence directly. In 1921, a field preacher named Reverend Lyle composed a sermon around the refrain, "She's the water now." The crowd responded, "And the water keeps us." The exchange turns loss into covenant. What the census lists as disappearance becomes continuity. The sermon survives only because a journalist skeptical of folk religion transcribed it for ridicule. The mockery preserved what belief would have left to air. Letters from descendants of freed families collected in 1940 by the Negro History Project describe dreams repeating through generations. One reads, "My grandmother saw her by the river before she died. My mother saw her again in the Mirror Basin when the house flooded." The letter concludes, "She looks at us as if asking, 'Did you cross yet?'" The archivist classifies the material under superstition's water rights, but the phrasing, part confession, part question, belongs to history's unanswered. By 1952, a local journalist investigating folklore finds in a courthouse storage room the carbon copy of the 1859 ledger long thought destroyed. The pages stick together from moisture. The upper right corner carries the faint shape of a handprint, not in ink but in the transfer of oil to paper. The writer describes it clinically. possibly caused by contact during storage. The article prints in the Delta Observer accompanied by the subtitle, "The Hand That Stayed." Readers interpret it both as evidence and omen. During the civil rights era, the legend returned as metaphor. In a 1964 protest march in Jackson, participants carried signs reading, "The water remembers." When questioned by reporters, one woman replied, "It was our first road." No historian drew the connection to the 1859 case. Yet the phrase linked belief and archive once more, the invisible line between history as recorded and history as lived. In 1978, folklorist Dr. Elaine Thorne published her synthesis Between River and Record. She concluded that the persistence of this narrative demonstrates mutual dependency between empirical absence and spiritual permanence. Her final paragraph reads, "Where the ledger ends, the hymn begins." Both preserve truth through incompleteness. Her critics accused her of poeticizing, yet in the archives where she worked, the faint smell of lamp oil still lingers on the original documents. Today, digital restoration of the Field 7C audio reveals a low human breath before the humming starts too deliberate to be mechanical. Acoustic analysis shows it matching the natural frequency of the river's surface at that depth and latitude. Science reads waveform. Folklore hears invocation. One calls it resonance, the other remembrance. The convergence is no longer coincidence. The record and the ritual mirror one another. Fact becomes reflection. Faith becomes documentation. The woman who led the river exists in both languages, one written in ink that fades, the other sung in a voice that refuses silence. The archive measures what was seen, the spirit measures what was felt. Between them lies the narrowest space imaginable, the moment before the current divides. The final transcription of Field 7C ends with no word at all, only the low hum that fades into static. The sound lasts 43 seconds and then silence. The catalog note reads, "Recording ends abruptly. Reel ran out." The archivist in 1951 wrote beside it, "Perhaps she stopped singing." Yet when replayed on a modern system, a faint pulse is heard at the very end. Not music, not voice, but a soft thump spaced evenly like a drum, half a mile away. A similar rhythm appears in the earliest field diary of 1859. Deputy Clerk Rowe wrote of hearing thuds against the boat hull while searching the floodplain for debris. He described them as measured, deliberate, as though struck by unseen oar. The language is bureaucratic, but the cadence is the same. The sound moved downstream and then ceased. His entry concludes with 3 words, "All quiet now." Quiet. Decades later, a 1937 WPA worker recorded an elderly man who recalled every time the river rose, they said she was walking again. You could hear the drums, not up here, not down there, but under. When asked what the drums said, he answered, "Nothing, just kept answering." The transcript ends there. The typist marked in parentheses, interview paused, silence extended. The silence repeated itself in different forms, in missing lines, lost recordings, erased names. The physical archives reflect that pattern. Faded ink water stains fragments of handwriting trailing off mid-word, absence arranged like music. Every document plays a version of the same refrain disappearance as notation. In 1872, a newspaper article about the river apparition closes with an editorial correction. Reports exaggerated. Nothing unusual found at site. The line occupies the same column space as earlier ads for runaways. The correction and the call share equal measure, proof and denial printed side by side. The layout itself becomes echo. Another entry from the Freedmen's Bureau Journal ends with the fragment. "She carried a light before the ink fails." The scribe had switched pens mid-sentence. The rest never resumed. The next page begins a new case unrelated. The archivists later confirmed no missing leaf. The thought simply stopped, as if the sentence itself reached water and could not cross. In oral tradition, endings rarely end. One woman recorded in 1938 closed her interview with a short verse, "If you forget her name, the river won't." The interviewer asked her to repeat it. She refused. "Once is enough," she said. "The water remembers better than we do." Those were her last words on tape. Then static, then quiet, then the same low pulse as Field 7C. A letter dated 1866 from Reverend Amos Fry describes hearing drumming through the mist. He believed it to be echoes from Confederate artillery tests upstream. His correspondent, however, noted that no exercises had been scheduled for that week. The phenomenon went unrecorded afterward. In his margin, Fry later wrote, "The sound stopped when I prayed." The ink line beneath "prayed" is uneven, as though his hand trembled. Every record that touches this story ends in some distortion, torn paper, broken wax, partial transcription. When historians reconstructed timelines, the gaps aligned too perfectly, like deliberate syncopation. "There is order in the omissions," Elaine Thorne wrote in 1978. Each silence occurs at the same point when she is about to speak. The river itself became part of the archive. Hydrographic surveys from 1901 to 1950 chart subtle changes along the old crossing site. The bend shifts north, then returns as if breathing. Locals said, "She's turning over." The scientists marked it erosion cycles. The language diverges, the motion remains. An audio engineer restoring Field 7C in 2002 noticed that when the hum ends, the river's recorded waveform matches the rhythm of a human heartbeat slowed by sleep. He described the moment as a pulse between two silences. He left it unedited, calling it archival truth. The final restoration note says simply, "End preserved." During a symposium in 1985, Thorne presented her final paper. She played the recording once to a hall of academics. When it ended, no one spoke. She looked at the crowd and said, "You hear it too. Not sound, but return." The audience remained silent for a full minute. In her notes, she described that silence as collective recognition, the archive breathing back. Every reappearance of the motif follows the same pattern: light water drum silence. The woman becomes all four guide, witness, reflection, void. In some versions, she leads them across. In others, she never leaves the shore, yet always the same echo. No one wrote again, but the drums kept answering. Even the map mirrors the rhythm. The 1869 survey line curls back on itself in a loop, an accidental repetition in ink. Modern analysts call it cartographic error. But when superimposed over satellite data, the loop aligns exactly with the sound wave pattern of Field 7C. The error and the echo share one geometry. In 1941, during flood restoration, workers uncovered wooden fragments embedded in silt, possibly remnants of an old ferry or bridge. The pieces produced a hollow tone when struck. A laborer described it, "Sounded like a drum underwater." The foreman dismissed the remark. The report lists the materials as discarded timbers, value negligible. Still, the worker's description was written in his own margin in pencil, as if unable to let the sound go. The last living witness, interviewed a woman named Clara Simmons in 1943, spoke slowly, often pausing mid-sentence. The transcript records her final words before she died a week later. "She carried the river in her chest, that's why it still beats." The field recorder captured no further audio. The typist's note says, "Long pause, distant thunder, end of tape." Across all these records, the letters, the songs, the testimonies, the refrain folds back water as boundary drum, as memory, silence as proof. Each element mirrors the others. The further one reads, the quieter it becomes. At last, language itself gives way to rhythm, rhythm to stillness. The closer we approach her, the less we can speak. What remains is the echo not of her steps, but of what followed after. The bureaucrats wrote numbers, the believers heard beats. Each sought permanence and each found only repetition. The echo is both. It returns without changing, it confirms without explaining. When the final file closes, there is no conclusion. Only a note, typewritten by an archivist half a century later, "End of collection." Remaining material lost in flood 1973. The loss completes the pattern, the river reclaiming the river's own. And so the story reaches its highest volume by erasing sound. The records end mid-line, the witnesses end mid-breath. But under every silence, something continues to answer, faint, deliberate, rhythmic. Not a song, not a voice. A heartbeat in the mud. A drum under the water. A history that never stops returning. The ledger is now kept in a temperature-controlled vault at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. It sits on the second shelf of the Unverified Incidents Collection Box 1214B. The paper has darkened to the color of river silt. The ink is brittle like dried mud. Each letter trembles slightly under magnification as if trying to move again. Researchers handle it with gloves. Even air is measured by humidity sensors. The curator says they keep it alive by control. The microfilm copies of Field 7C are housed separately in the Audio Conservation Wing of Mississippi State University Library. The real box is labeled in plain type, "Unknown Female Voice, Warren County, 1937. There is no accession number beside it. Students can request playback only once per year. When they do, The hum fills the headphones for 43 seconds, then silence. Some report hearing the faint drum. The archive staff attribute it to mechanical interference. The correspondence of Margaret Lynn Folsom and James R. Culver has been digitized, though several letters remain missing. The originals were discovered in 1991 in a condemned storage building behind the old courthouse. Damp, folded, and unreadable in parts, they now exist as high-resolution scans, visible yet illegible. The metadata lists condition partial legibility, possible mildew. The last line of Culver's final letter is preserved only in fragment. When she calls again, I will follow. The Southern Folklore Almanac issues from 1881 to 1905 rest in the University of Louisiana's special collections. Between pages 212 and 213 of the 1881 volume, a small pressed reed is still trapped. Botanists identified it as a species native to the Yazoo floodplain. Someone must have used it as a bookmark, perhaps marking the page that dismissed the river lady as superstition. The plant has outlived the editors who denied its meaning. The hymn walk, Slow Through the Water, survives through its inclusion in the 1931 Delta Spirituals Anthology. The publisher omitted the author's name. Liner notes describe it as anonymous of uncertain origin. The melody has been re-recorded 15 times under different titles. None acknowledge the legend. Yet the refrain, "Don't speak her name, don't wake her hand," remains identical. The pattern of silence continues to echo in public sound. At the National Archives in Washington, Box 47 of the Federal Writers Project holds the typed transcript labeled Mississippi Oral History, Warren and Claiborne. The top corner bears a water stain shaped almost circular pale gray on the yellowing paper. The curvature resembles the edge of a lantern's reflection. The archivists call it accidental art. Visitors notice it first. Every object attached to the case has absorbed a part of the river: the smell of oil, the warping of cellulose, the soft decay of rope fibers. Time has replayed the same motif through chemistry. What the documents tried to describe, they have become. In 2002, the digital restoration of Field 7C uncovered the pulse at the end of the reel. Audio technicians isolated the sound, charted its waveform, and concluded that it matched the low-frequency vibration of water pressure against wooden hulls. They labeled it unidentified resonance. In the final report, engineer Samuel Lee added an unofficial note: "If this is interference, it is remarkably patient." Visitors to the vault often pause after playback. Some describe a physical stillness as though the room itself were listening back. The curator says the silence after the hum feels heavier than the sound itself. That weight and absence, measurable only by its echo, has become the archive's truest artifact. What remains unclear are the identities that once surrounded her. No list of escapees matches the year 1859. No personal name links ledger to song. Scholars dispute whether the woman existed or if she was composite memory made flesh by repetition. Others suggest she was both a person who became symbol because the record refused to hold her. The Mississippi floods of 1973 erased part of the county's shoreline. When the waters receded, fragments of brick and wood appeared near the coordinates marked Old Crossing. Locals claimed the shape resembled a stairway. The Corps of Engineers classified it as erosional anomaly. A single tourist photograph survives 5 uneven steps leading down into the water, then disappearing. After the flood, archivists noted further loss. Half of Culver's field reels were destroyed by mold. The remaining tapes were reboxed, sealed in nitrogen. Their index card carries the final entry: last inspection 2009, condition stable, content unknown, playback discouraged. The order to preserve without hearing is the purest continuation of the motif, keeping the sound alive through refusal. At academic conferences, historians still argue over whether the myth honors or obscures history. One camp insists on evidence, the other defends emotion. Neither notices how their cadence mirrors the alternating rhythm of the drums in Field 7C. Every argument repeats the same beat: proof, faith, proof, faith. Between them, the silence keeps time. The phrase, "she's the water," now appears again in modern literature, stripped of context, used as metaphor for grief migration resistance. Few know its origin. Each repetition further erases the original, yet also keeps it alive. The echo sustains itself by misunderstanding. In 2017, a graduate student recataloging the Mississippi Folklore Project discovered that one metadata tag, MHSP-RIV-1859 JHR, linked to a deleted file. The backup revealed only static labeled "recovered from flood hard drive." The waveform, when visualized, displayed a slow curve repeating at regular intervals, identical to the drum pattern from the first recording. Accidental duplication or deliberate echo, no one confirmed which. Today, the legend circulates online as digital folklore. Anonymous users post audio recreations slowed and distorted over footage of moving water. The comment sections fill with the same sentence, "I can still hear her." It has no verified author. The internet becomes the new river, an endless current of fragments, reflections, and silence between. Curators call the original objects the collection. The communities who still tell the story call them the reminders. To the state they are artifacts, to memory they are witnesses. Every label is both correct and insufficient. The documents end exactly where the story begins, with sound fading into water, with water holding what language cannot. Scholars note this as structural coincidence. Believers call it design. The truth lies where both explanations meet and cancel each other out. No one knows what happened to James R. Culver after 1938. His absence completes the symmetry the collector joined his collection. Each person who entered the river of the record eventually vanished inside it. And still, the drums keep answering. When we listen now through restored speakers and climate-sealed air, the hum returns at its faintest volume. It is the same pulse that once hit the hull of a wooden boat in 1859, the same vibration in the wax reel, the same frequency of blood under the skin. The archive is not silent. It breathes at intervals too slow for impatience to hear. Maybe they didn't disappear, maybe we did. Because the more faithfully we preserve, the further we drift from the world that created the song. The ledger, the tape, the annotation all stand between us and the moment that required neither proof nor playback. What remains is not her story, but our reflection inside it, the living pretending to hold still while the dead keep moving. Philosophical epilogue. The archive is a mirror that hums. The river is its memory, endlessly erasing and rewriting the same line. Every document is a vessel, every silence a page. To search the past is to listen for an answer that never stops replying. The drums kept answering because they were never calling for her. They were calling for us to remember that the silence we hear is our own.